Good morning, everyone. I'm Jill D'Alessandro, curator of costume and textile arts here at the Fine Arts Museums. And I want to thank you all for coming out for our opening day celebrations of High Style, the Brooklyn Museum collection. I am so thrilled that this exhibition is finally here at the museums. This exhibition culminated with the landmark agreement between the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Brooklyn Museum of Art to share the Brooklyn Museum's renowned collection of costume. For those of us who know, the Brooklyn Museum had one of the foremost collection, still does, because it's retained its identity at the Met, but one of the foremost collections of fashion in the United States. In 2005, they received a $4 million Mellon Fellowship to review the collection. That project was led by Glier Reeder, our speaker today. At the end of that, granting period and review, photographing and examining the collection, it was determined that the Brooklyn Museum could no longer afford to house the collection. And they went into this agreement with the Metropolitan Museum of Art. For those of us who care and preserve and are dedicated to preserving costume collections, this really is a heartwarming story where two institutions would join together in order to preserve a costume collection. In 2010, both museums had exhibitions that were based on these wonderful collections at the Brooklyn Museum. At the Brooklyn Museum, it was American High Style, fashioning a national collection, and at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, it was American Woman. Glier Reeder was the curator of the Brooklyn Museum exhibition, as well as the author of the publication. In 2000, just this last summer, she co-curated and co-authored the exhibition Charles James, along with her colleague Harold Coda, director of the Costume Institute. So I am so thrilled to have this exhibition finally here. I think we started conversations in 2010, right after, on the heels of the debut at Brooklyn. And I want to thank our director, Colin Bailey, for finally making this happen. So please give us a warm welcome to Jan. Oh, I'm sorry. So yes, well, please give us a warm welcome to Glier Reeder.
Thank you for that warm welcome. One of the most fascinating aspects of the creative process is how a designer or artist transforms a source of inspiration, such as an object or image or shape or experience, into a work with an aesthetic that is uniquely his own. His or her own. How deftly he accomplishes this is, in fact, one element that defines a standout within his body of work. Fashion designers from the 18th century on have unabashedly mined the details, cuts, and silhouettes of styles from previous eras and world cultures as source material to inspire their own creativity. Fine arts works and art movements also figure largely in the repertories of references. The great couture master Charles James often asserted that there are a limited number of shapes and silhouettes, but innumerable variations on them. Throughout his career, he reused and reworked his own previously developed forms and design elements, many of which in turn were based on past styles. I think a good term to describe this phenomenon whereby designers and artists value and build upon the work of their predecessors is the design continuum. So today we'll consider some of the ways the fashion creators represented in High Style have worked within this design continuum. I've arranged the sources of inspiration into three categories, being very curatorial. The first is influences of historical fashions. Next is the influences of traditional clothing from world cultures. And the last is the influences of artists and art movements. The draped garments of the ancient Greeks and Romans are among the most enduring sources of reference in the fashion repertoire. The mid-20th century French designer Madame Gray was particularly well known for her graceful draped and pleated columnar gowns based on classical models. This minimalist example, which of course is in the show, from 1937, is one of her earliest. And she employs just two lengths of fabric that are sewn together with openings left for the arms and for the head, and a couple of added pieces of fabric in the sides of the skirts for fullness. She has replicated the fold-over bloused effect at the waists of these two Greek garments known as the peplos on your left and the chiton on your right. By folding the fabric over on itself, you can see, before stitching it down. The technique used by the Greeks was to wrap a cord or a girdle around the body, around the waist, and then pulling up the fabric and draping it over the girdle to create the fold. Although Gray developed a wide repertoire of styles and cuts in her body of work over her long career, she continued to make these gorgeous Greek-inspired columnar gowns throughout her career, and the ones from the 50s and 60s really endure as a signature of design of her body of work. And this is one gorgeous example of one from the Costume Institute, and you can see it becomes much more structured. The bodice has a stiff under structure to keep its form. So that early piece in the exhibition is a really wonderful, rare example of how she started out. Here, this dress from Charles Frederick Worth, from the House of Worth, is an example of historic costume from the medieval period. The House of Worth, which was the first couture house, of course, was renowned for incorporating elements of historical costume into its fashion-setting designs. Associations with the past lent to the garments a certain sense of importance and grandeur, which appealed to the elite Victorian and Edwardian clients that they served. In this circa 1910 evening gown by Worth's son, Jean-Philippe, who was the head designer after 1895, the elements from the Middle Ages are combined to evoke that era's elegance and grace. The image of the Burgundian court at the bottom left illustrates the basic form of medieval dress that features a high-waisted bodice, long skirt, pointed overskirt, and a cone-shaped headpiece known as a hennin, with veiling cascading down from its point. The Worth gown generally follows the lines of the medieval fashion, And I suggest that the black neck drapery here, hanging from the points at the bust, corresponds or refers to that from the headwear. And in yet another repositioning, the lattice work pattern fashioned in rhinestones on the bodice is a common decorative motif in many 15th and 16th century portraits, such as the one at the top. You can see it right there in the headpiece, probably worked in pearls, and also in the windows. There's a little touch of modernism, however, in this medieval-inspired gown, because Worth, Worth used the fabric for the overskirt and left all of the selvage visible without turning it over and hiding it. And that was a rather avant-garde idea at the time. Inspirations of the 18th century costume abound throughout the creative work of many designers from all subsequent periods. The most frequently referenced is the robe à la Française, with its pleated, draped back, often referred to, as the Watteau back and the wide-hipped pannier silhouette. The film designer Adrian first grappled with the 18th century style when he created the costumes for the 1938 film Marie Antoinette, starring Norma Shearer. Like the original robe à la Française, its shape was supported by a rigid basket-like understructure that is known as panniers. So you can see that that wide-hipped skirt in the costume would have to have some rather intense understructure supporting it. But 10 years later, he revisited the style in designing this dramatic 1948 evening gown. Aside from the wide-hipped shape, however, it is a gown of an altogether different stripe. If you'll, you got it. Substituting craft for heft, he sculpted the standout shape by combining the natural stiffness of the silk taffeta with skilled dressmaking techniques so that no other support was required to create that standout silhouette. The pattern of the dress further amuses because although it was part of his collection that was inspired by a trip to Africa, he quipped that it was a joke because everyone knows there are no tigers in Africa. But I think that that is not the last word on this subject, because although there are no tigers in Africa and no tiger stripes, as far as I know, on 18th century textiles, there are leopards in Africa, and there are leopard print spots on 18th century textiles. As you can see, I hope. Here and here, which is always a surprise to me when I see those. Also note, before we go to the next one, what is called the sack back, or the pleats that are typical of the robe à la Française. Because I would suggest that this Givenchy dress from 1960 is also informed by the 18th century robe à la Française. It seems that in a single spontaneous gesture, the textile was wrapped around the body and draped into an elegant reductivist version of the pleated, so-called bateau back that defines the 18th century. So you can see these are even looser than the later pleats of the robe à la française. And to underscore that 18th century theme in this dress, take a look at the textile and look at the fringes along the bottom. And I suggest that it is precisely the same kind of textile that would have been hanging in a salon, in an 18th century salon, as are these faithfully reproduced, drapes here, which are fringed along the side and of the same weight and texture as the dress. The persistence of 18th design exists in footwear as well. This Louis heel as seen on these embroidered latchet shoes from around 1760, was developed in the early part of the 18th century, and like other elements of 18th century dress, versions of the Louis heel have come and gone throughout the 2.5 centuries since it was first fashionable. But there's only one designer, Pietro Jantorni, who perfected the elegant inner curve of the original, which and that became his defining hallmark of his designs. Of course, and I think that is such a distinctive shape there that one can, if you've seen enough of them, you can immediately recognize a Jantorni shoe because of it. And I think that he actually has perfected the elegant line of the original. And also you will notice that it's a pretty faithful reproduction of the latchet shoe, the latchet being that part of the 18th century shoe, which is fastened by a buckle. And here there's a strap across the instep that is like the latchet, and also that high tongue that goes up over the arch. So in the exhibition, if you haven't seen it yet, is this marvelous trunk of Jantorni shoes that belong to Rita D'Acosta Leidig. It's a real treasure. Nothing else like it exists in the world. And just a few examples of some of the ones that are in it. And you can see this, the same, the Louis heel, the latchet, and the high tongue. This one's, a number of the shoes are covered with 17th century lace, and I also believe that this is 17th century velvet on this one. And there is our Rita wearing one of her many pairs of lace-covered shoes. It is said that she had 300 pairs of Jantorni shoes, and he was advertised himself as the most expensive shoemaker in the world, and I don't think anyone has ever denied that. So now let's turn from the 18th century and join Charles James in the Victorian era. James was particularly captivated by the shapes and structures of 19th century dress. The bustle, which called attention to a woman's derriere by artificially enhancing its size and hence its every movement, inspired James for its erotic appeal. And you will see, note the way the brown jersey is draped in the front. And I would suggest, we know that James was a student of Victorian clothing, and he was clearly looking at all of the various shapes and draping techniques that were used at that time. So I think this is a pretty clear example of how, what he might have been thinking about or had in his mind when he was creating that dress. You see how the front drapery is really quite similar. And then the position of the bow, you cannot deny that they are both situated very close to where he situated his rosette on the back of that dress. And also to underscore the fact that this is a Victorian reference, that you see Millicent Rogers posing in James's atelier on the left, and the Bouguereau painting, The Bathers. In the editorial that accompanied this picture of Millicent Rogers, it suggested that she was striking a Bouguereau pose. And I think if you turned the bather around, you would see that she was pretty much in exactly the same pose. It's really amusing, and I'm quite sure that Charles James was referencing that particular painting because it hung in the salon of Gypsy Rose Lee, who was one of his great clients as well. And our final reference into the historical shapes is the bloomer play suit in this ensemble by Vera Maxwell. In the exhibition, you might not recognize this because it is dressed with a beautiful tailored black coat on top. It's a four-piece ensemble, and you don't have the privilege of seeing the bloomers. But she had this idea in the early 40s that women needed what she would call a weekend wardrobe that would be adaptable and versatile for different times of the day and different activities. And so you have a tailored-looking outfit, a more casual skirt and vest, and then if you need suddenly to take off your clothes and exercise for some reason, or go hiking or something, you do have your play suit. But I think the other aspect of this is that she made the play suit out of parachute cloth, because this was actually created for an important exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum called Inventions for Victory, which was right in the middle of World War II in 1942, and was displaying all of the American-made goods that were being made and substitute, not even substitute, but innovative textiles that could be used at that time. So the parachute cloth was a substitute really for silk, which was in very short supply due to the embargo on silk in Japan. And this is our historical precedent. These, I think the picture on the right, on the left, is clearly the 1920s, some girls in their gym suits, and on the right, it's probably very early 20th century. It's actually quite fashionable because she has that monobosom shape in the front of her bodice. But the bloomers are really very, I think the fullness of them is the whole point, because they are still very modest. They hide the body, and yet you really do have a lot more freedom of movement. And finally, I don't think that Norma Kamali was actually directly influenced by Vera Maxwell, but it is wonderful confluence that she made this evening ensemble out of parachute cloth, complete with a ripcord that could be pulled, that could actually work and could change the height of the hemline. So I couldn't resist throwing this in. I think that the term maybe in-house historicism might be an apt way to describe Chanel's creative process, as her genius lay in revisiting her own signature elements over a period of 4 decades. And Chanel was, of course, influential, along with Jean Patou, in establishing the tubular knee-length silhouette that prevailed in the 1920s. And it was sort of epitomized by her little black dress, which she showed first in 1926. So you see a really tailored version of that on the left and a cocktail version on the right. So in creating our 1960s version of this dress, she was really referencing 2 of the former black dresses that she made. As fashions lengthened in the early 1930s, she developed a very soft romantic style that featured a floor-length lace or tulle gowns embellished with overall horizontal tiers or ruffles, as the one that you see on the right. But to create this very flirty 1960s version, she actually amalgamated the two earlier styles, one romantic, one rather tailored and minimal. And I propose that she, well, first of all, when you look at it, you rather want to just pull up all of the ruffles and put them on the bodice and have that be the new version. But in addition to that, she, I think, included some sort of tailoring rigor by adding horizontal stiff ribbon between the ruffles, which controls the ruffles and controls them from being too fluffy, I would say. And of course, then she raises the hemline about a foot above where it was in the 1920s. And the little black dress endures well into the 21st century. With every collection in Chanel, there are always some new and cute and innovative versions of her historic style. Now we'll go to the references and influences of traditional clothing from world cultures that prevail and are found in abundance in Western couture and designer clothing. When the ballet russe was introduced or opened, when the ballet russe opened Scheherazade in Paris in 1910, with their brilliant colors and exotic clothing, it took Paris by storm, and sort of turned all design areas upside down, including fashion. And fashion designers all scrambled to begin making Orientalist costumes or evening wear within bright colors, and definitely bedecked with all manner of tassels. You can see the tassel is really the symbol, I think, of exoticism. And of course, here you see the great dancer Vaslav Nijinsky as a slave in Scheherazade, and one of the sets by Leon Basque, these brilliant colors. And you can see where this is something that the Westerners, the Parisians, had never seen before. And in our show, we have two examples of evening wear that certainly have that Oriental influence, hung with many tassels. But what is interesting is that unlike the harem pants that you saw on Nijinsky, these two garments are constructed, and really not constructed, as an Indian dhoti, which is draped between the legs. It's not sewn, and just leaving holes for the legs, as in this great example, I think. And here was wonderful when we found this sketch from the House of Callow, who made the pieces in the exhibition, and you can see exactly the way they envisioned that it would look. Now this, however, was everyone, all the rich matrons in Paris and America did not run out and decide to wear these pants. This was very avant-garde, and only someone as daring and unconventional as Rita D'Acosta Leidig, the owner of the shoes and the great trunk, would wear such a daring outfit. But it was quite interesting to find this sketch, to see that the Callow-Sirs actually did put it into production, and it wasn't just a custom idea that had come from Rita herself. And it persists today in all forms. In fact, these look quite a bit like the one on the left, where the legs are really sewn tight to the actual leg. Traditional Indian dress was also the inspiration for this sundress by Carolyn Schnurr and accompanying bathing suit. She took trips to exotic places in the world in the early 1950s, which at that time was somewhat daring and adventuresome. She went to Africa and India and Japan, and she came back and then named her collections the flight to India, flight to Japan, etc. And here she brought back what you see on the right is the original voile, very simple sari, and it's been folded up, so that's not the right shape of a sari, obviously. But on the left, then she had it reproduced by the ABC Textile company, and it's really line for line. You can see the border. But what she didn't include is the wide end borders in the production of the fabric. This is to show you, which you probably mostly know, the way that the sari fabric is usually woven, which is, of course, it's a great, very long piece of, rectangular piece of fabric, and it's pleated. The skirt is created by pleating just hand pleating it into the waist, and then it is draped over the shoulder, and the fabric is woven with on the long ends with a more narrow border, and then a more elaborate border on the short ends. So here, Mamouche, this dress is always also in the exhibition. Everything I'm showing you is in the exhibition, of course. But I think it's wonderful to look at these two garments, and one by American man, one by an American woman, and how different they are, but how their inspirations and the materials they used are very similar. Here, it's a much dressier sari, and Mamouche incorporates. Again, it's horizontal. It's held horizontally, as the sari would be when it's put on, when it's draped on at the waist. And so you have the narrow border here, and the wide border is showcased along here. Bonnie Cashin designed this at-home gown was inspired by a film costume that she designed, so she was inspired by herself, for a 1946 film, Anna and the King of Siam. And what you see here, the film costumes were inspired by the traditional two-piece costumes worn by dancers from the Punjab in northwest India. And so you can note the bare bodices. And here, her claim here, her intention here, was to shift the erogenous zone to the midriff, away from the bare backs that really were de rigueur in the 1930s, the very low-backed, slinky evening wear of that decade. And she effectively accomplished this focus on making it an erogenous zone by covering all the other areas of the body that actually were bare in the costumes, and leaving just that midriff area as the new object of desire. There's so much to say about this Airwaves hat. I feel like I'm getting really obsessed with it. But I think it's one of the great designs of all time. Sally Victor designed this hat for Mamie Eisenhower wore it to a luncheon prior to the inauguration of her husband, and then she got so much press adulation about this hat that she was wearing that she wore another one to the on the day of the actual inauguration. Anyway, she was a great student of objects and used the resources in the Brooklyn Museum extensively. And she said that it was inspired, along with several other hats, by this this armor and the helmet that was worn by the kabuki soldiers. I'm sorry, samurai soldiers. And it was the overlapping plates, so those overlapping elements here that she was looking at. So we're back to Adrian now. On the left is a dress that he designed, which was an homage to Picasso. And it was the first time he did something that was really quite difficult, to cut out these really irregular shapes and then to piece it all together into a garment. And it took a very specialized technique to do this, so that in the end, the fabric would fall gracefully and without a lot of puckering and wrinkling. So he revisited this technique in these two dresses that made of silk pongee that he created for his wife Janet Gaynor to wear to their famous African trip in 1949. as I looked at this dress, after I just learned not that long ago that especially this dress on the right, was definitely something that Janet Gaynor took with her, because there was an editorial about it, and there's a photograph of her and a spread on the great African trip. So after I realized that, it struck me that the piecing and the designs were very much like these robes that were worn by the House of Peoples of Nigeria. And if you look carefully, if you look at that shape, and it's there, and look at this shape and the squares, there's the shape precisely, and this is sort of corresponding to the other one that I pointed out, and the little square, there's a green square up here on the collar and square here, so it looks to me very much like those House of People's robes are, I think, were very well known, so it looks to me as if he was planning his cutouts according to those designs. And Africa also is a clear inspiration for this wonderful sort of surrealist hat by Sally Victor. You can have a good look at the back of it in this photo, because in the exhibition, of course, we couldn't show all sides, so you're seeing the front of it, but here's the back, which is equally fabulous. Obviously taken from the braided hairdos worn by African women, and this was done in 1937. So she's actually replicated a hairdo in a hat, but she brings it back to the fact that it's a hat for spring by using traditional spring materials to fashion it, which is the white piqué and navy blue straw. And here, I think this is pretty obvious when you put these two objects together. Schiaparelli was doing an interpretation of the beautifully embroidered suits of light worn by Spanish and American toreros. I'm sorry, Spanish and Mexican toreros. How interesting it is to make an evening ensemble from something that has such a very different function. And finally, artists and art movements. This wonderful, fabulous, surrealist necklace by Elsa Schiaparelli, as well as the other two necklaces in the exhibition, were all from Schiaparelli's 1938 collection that she called her pagan collection. And of course this one is made of clear rhodoid, and it is attached to it are these wonderful bug trinkets all around, so the wearer looks as if she has bugs crawling all over her neck when she's wearing it. That's not the only thing she did with bugs on it, though. There's this great suit that has bugs on the collar. Those are little buttons on the side that look more like roaches, I think. They're pretty creepy, because the color is also, the right color. So, and here's an example of one of the dresses that she designed for her pagan collection. You can see this sort of wonderful greenery and drapery and trailing flowers. Well, this whole collection was based on the one beautiful, iconic Botticelli painting, La Primavera. And and also the birth of Venus, although I think this is really, looks to me like the main inspiration. And you can see there are many different kinds of, there are flowers and greenery and leaves and vinery and so on, but there really is not an insect in sight. But I think that she took the collar and just substituted bugs, which is a great surrealist statement. But it looks to me like this actually is sort of a floral necklace. And again, the Schiaparelli butterfly dress, if you look at this carefully, you'll notice that the butterflies are not at all romanticized. They're not pastel and sort of fluttering around. They actually look like real insects. Again, it's, you know, it's beauty. It's a symbol that you think of as sweet and romantic, but in fact she makes it a little darker than that. And she actually amplified this idea by making a butterfly net cape to go with it, if you were so daring as to wear them both together. It's suggested by Dilys Blum, the great scholar, Schiaparelli scholar, that this was the inspiration, this photograph by Man Ray, for the textile, and it looks to, I don't think, it doesn't seem deniable to me. He was experimenting with a new photographic printing process that produced very rich colors. And it looks like a Lepidopterist, mount as well. So it's a very surrealist sort of resource, I think, for that textile. And I'm getting very pedagogical here, but I couldn't help doing this. This wonderful zodiac jacket by Schiaparelli has the glyphs of the zodiac embroidered on the left and right front panels. And I've always known this, but I didn't really know which was what, because I always think of the pictorial images. So for your delectation, you can figure out which one is which on the jacket. And the order is always presented in this way on these charts, but it's not the order that's on the jacket. And it's hard to figure out exactly how they made those choices as to placement on the jacket. It doesn't seem to be obvious in any way, except that these are these and these are very similar, so that rather makes sense. But these don't seem to make that much sense design-wise. The other aspect of this jacket is the Big Dipper, which is outlined here in stars, and that was Schiaparelli's personal emblem, which she adopted when she was a young girl, because she had a beloved uncle who comforted her because she had moles on her face that she felt self-conscious about. He was an astronomer, and he told her that they were marks of beauty because they were the same configuration as the Big Dipper. So it was her emblem throughout her life, and she wore this pin always, or there are many pictures of her wearing it. So that's an example of how she certainly took her personal life and experiences from her personal life and translated them into her aesthetic vision. This wonderful Baroque bedroom is at the Metropolitan Museum, And what I'm highlighting is the C curves here. And does that look familiar? Isn't that fabulous? That's a black satin shoe by Stephen Arpad, and it's in the exhibition. But, you know, it goes on. The House of Chanel picked up on it as well. How many years later? And here, Geoffrey Bean. I juxtapose these two because obviously they are both takes, representations of Matisse's leaf design. And in this case, Victor actually duplicates Matisse's process of making cutouts, but they're out of felt, and she puts them on straw. Whereas, of course, Matisse's cutouts are paper, which he applied mostly on paper, but also on sometimes on fabric. So she transposes the actual materials that Matisse would have used. And whereas Geoffrey Bean had a custom-made textile in homage to the great master. And I had to show several of these because the fantastic cutouts, Matisse cutouts exhibition was at MoMA, and I had just come back from seeing it. And so these are some pieces that were in the show, but you can see that leaf design is just very, very, very prevalent. And I can't say with any certainty that Madame Gray was subliminally or otherwise conjuring this Nadar photograph of the French mime Charles Devereux, dressed as the character of Pierrot. But when she gathered these dramatic sleeves, but it's certainly, once you know that image, it's very hard not to put them, not to see them as referencing as one being the reference for the other. And finally, our Clover dress, which of course has many stories to it. First of all, it is really, I think, based on, you know, as I said before, James was very influenced by historical fashions. So I think the idea of the crinoline, the big, wide crinoline skirt that is supported by boning is certainly expressed here. And you can see on the left, this is a 19th century cage crinoline, which would be an example of what would have been worn under that red dress. And on the right is, and you'll be able to see this in the animation in the exhibition. Don't miss it, it's pretty interesting. But you can see there are several layers of boning. And I also just want to point out this, the real biomorphic shape of the under structure of the gown, because I think we leave historicism when we just recognize the cage crinoline origins. Well, and here you have James's sketch of what he envisioned the understructure looking like. Because I think that that dress is also a very modernist expression of the biomorphism, which is one of the great shapes of modernism in the 40s and 50s, such as this Noguchi ceiling for the American Stove Company, and this this swimming pool that was actually, it's in Sonoma, but I think that the owners were San Franciscans. But you can see these curvaceous biomorphic shapes that were created. I tried to choose ones that were created prior to James's 1952 dress, because a lot of the biomorphic images are actually after the Clover dress was made. And I might be stretching it here, but but you can blame my colleague Kevin Staten, who wrote this wonderful book on vital forms, for putting this in. But it is the clover leaf interchanges that were being built at the same time, 1951. So, and here's the hat again, looking to me like some sort of wonderful Bucky Fuller building. But you can just, seeing it from the top in black and white, I think it takes on a whole different perspective. And I think it's no coincidence that this hat and the Clover gown were made for the same event, so at exactly the same time. And that this aesthetic of this curvaceous biomorphic curves was definitely in the air, which makes both of them very up-to-the-minute contemporaneous pieces as well. Oh, there she is again. I am obsessed with her. And just finally, just for fun, these are some of the sets, polyvore sets, which were created by visitors to the American High Style show at the Brooklyn Museum, and they're just wonderfully creative. I think people had a lot of fun doing them. I think it was mostly younger people, of course, who would have the ability to put all this together. But here's the lovely Givenchy dress. She's not in her 18th century Wrightsman rooms where I placed her, but rather sort of floating in the clouds with the divine Audrey Hepburn. Here's our Madame Grey, not at all with Pierrot, but really in a scenario that looked to me like Indiana Jones meets Nancy Drew, or something like that. It's some kind of a whodunit. But anyway, the dress inspired that by that polyvore maker. And you will recognize, I hope, the Schiaparelli jacket that is part of the sort of mix and match ensemble here. That dress, it was in the original High Style show. It's a Balenciaga, as were the Ferragamo boots. So it's a really very modern looking kind of outfit. And here, the tiger dress is given sort of that wild animal aspect of it is given full expression when it's reiterated in this mane of untamed hair. The tigers don't really have the manes, but it looks very much like that's what was happening. And again, those Ferragamo boots. And finally, our little black dress, which is silhouetted against, looks to me like cherry blossoms. And next to this beautiful dark-haired beauty that I think is very hard to date. She seems to me like a sort of classic beauty who could exist in any century. So thank you very much.